The dining room glowed with warm light, but beneath it ran a current as cold as ice. My son sat at the head of the table, his fiancée at his side, her smile practiced, her laughter sharp. Plates clattered, glasses chimed, conversation bubbled. To any outsider, we were a happy family celebrating an upcoming wedding. Then she said it. "So," she began lightly, lifting her glass, "we've made a decision about the guest list." She paused for effect, eyes gleaming with something cruel. "We won't be inviting elderly guests. Weddings are exhausting, and frankly," she laughed, a tinkling sound like glass breaking, "it just drags down the atmosphere." A ripple of laughter circled the table. Cousins smirked, uncles chuckled, even my son gave a tight smile as though too embarrassed to stop her. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I felt every eye shift toward me, subtle but undeniable. Everyone knew who she meant. Me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My chest ached with humiliation. My ears roared with the sound of forced laughter. My son cleared his throat, looking anywhere but at me. She leaned closer to him, whispering loudly enough for all to hear, "It's better this way. Weddings should be about youth, not wheelchairs." The words sliced through me. Wheelchairs. As if my presence was nothing but a burden, a shadow at the edge of their happiness. I set my fork down, hands steady though my insides shook. I looked at her, really looked, and saw not a young bride, but a woman drunk on her own cruelty, reveling in the applause of the room. I wanted to speak, to remind them all whose house this was, whose table they sat at, whose money paid for the wine they drank. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I pressed my lips together and let silence answer. Silence can be sharper than any retort. The dinner carried on, laughter spilling recklessly, conversations moving past me as though I were already erased. I sat in my chair, my husband's empty seat beside me like a wound, and felt the sting of betrayal in every heartbeat. But beneath the hurt, something else stirred. Not rage, not despair. Something quieter, stronger. A seed of resolve. By the time the plates were cleared, I had made a decision. Let them laugh. Let them think me weak, invisible, discarded. Let her believe she had won with a single cruel sentence. Because what none of them knew was this. By tomorrow, the laughter would end. And it would be she who knelt before me, begging. I did not sleep. The house lay in silence, but my mind replayed every detail of that dinner, like a cruel theater. The clinking of glasses, the ripple of laughter, the smug curve of her smile. No elderly guests. The words echoed, louder than the clock ticking on the mantel. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, grief pressing down on me like a weight. My husband's absence was a wound that had not healed. He would have spoken, would have silenced her with one look. But he was gone, and the table was hers to command. For a moment, I let myself imagine what he would have said. "Not everything is as it seems," he had often whispered when we faced storms together. He always prepared, always guarded against greed. It was his nature to leave nothing to chance. The memory sparked something in me. Perhaps he had foreseen even this. Perhaps he had left me more than just memories. I rose before dawn, the house still dark, and walked barefoot through the halls. The walls whispered with memories. My son's first steps, laughter echoing from birthdays, quiet nights when we believed family meant safety. Now those walls listened to whispers of betrayal. In the study, I lit a small lamp. His chair stood empty, but the scent of his cologne lingered faintly in the leather. I opened drawers, ran my fingers over papers, looking for something, anything, that would anchor me, that would prove I wasn't powerless. And then I found it. A sealed envelope tucked beneath the ledger, my name written in his hand. My throat tightened as I broke the seal. Inside were notes, instructions, reminders, hints of arrangements he had made in case of my absence. Investments, contacts, an attorney's name circled twice. My tears blurred the ink. Even from beyond the grave, he had not left me defenseless. As dawn broke, pale light spilling across the desk, I closed the envelope and pressed it to my chest. My humiliation at dinner still burned, but now it was not a flame of shame. It was fuel. They thought I would disappear quietly, that their laughter had buried me. But they had mistaken silence for weakness. By the time the sun rose, I was no longer the woman they mocked. I was the woman my husband had trusted to carry the torch. And tomorrow, the game would change. The knock came early, sharp and urgent. I had barely finished my tea when I opened the door and saw her, the same young woman who only last night had laughed about no elderly guests. But she was not laughing now. She stood on the porch with her makeup smeared, her hair unkempt, eyes wide and red from tears. And then, to my astonishment, she dropped to her knees right there on the doorstep. "Please," she choked, clutching at the hem of my dress. "Please, you have to come to the wedding." For a moment I could only stare, cold morning air rushing into the hall behind me. "I thought I was too old," I said quietly. "Too exhausting for your celebration." Her face twisted with desperation. "I was wrong. I shouldn't have said it. But you don't understand. If you don't come, it will ruin everything." Her words rang with panic, not sincerity. This was not remorse, it was fear. I stepped aside and led her into the sitting room, watching her pace, wringing her hands. Finally I said, "Explain." She hesitated, then blurted, "The sponsor, your husband's partner, he insists you must be there. He says without you, the wedding is meaningless. That the family name, the legacy—" She broke off, trembling. "He threatened to withdraw the funding. The venue, the catering, the dress, it all depends on you being present." Ah, there it was. Not guilt, not love, money, always money. I folded my hands in my lap, my face serene though my pulse thundered. She needed me. The girl who had mocked me before an entire table now knelt on my rug, begging for my presence like a supplicant before a queen. "And why?" I asked softly. "Should I help you?" Tears streaked her cheeks. "Because without you, everything collapses. We'll lose everything. Please, I'll do anything. Just say you'll come." I looked at her long and hard, letting silence stretch until it nearly broke her. At last I said, "Get up. Wipe your face. I will think about it." Her relief was immediate, but I did not give her a promise. Only a thread of hope. She left the house clinging to it like a lifeline. When the door closed, I allowed myself a long breath. Last night, they laughed at me. This morning, she knelt at my feet. One conflict ended. Another had begun. And I knew then that the wedding would not be the simple celebration they imagined. It would be the stage where truths unraveled and where I would reclaim my place. By noon, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was my son. He stood straighter than his fiancée had, but his face was drawn, shadows beneath his eyes betraying sleeplessness. "Mother," he said softly, stepping into the hall. "May I speak with you?" I led him to the sitting room. He didn't sit until I did, as though even in his turmoil he remembered his upbringing. For a moment, he only stared at his hands, twisting his wedding band to be. "She told me she came here this morning," he began. "That she begged." I said nothing. He let out a long breath. "She shouldn't have spoken to you the way she did last night." I should have stopped her. But you know how it is. She was nervous, trying to impress everyone, and sometimes she says things without thinking. "She said them clearly enough," I replied. My voice was calm, but the memory of the laughter still cut like glass. He winced. "Yes, and I'm sorry. But you know what's at stake. The partner, the sponsors, the money tied to the event, they're all insisting you attend. Without you, the entire wedding could collapse." There it was again. Not love, Not respect, but necessity. They needed me like one might need a signature on a loan, a seal on a contract. And if I choose not to go? I asked. He looked up sharply, desperation flickering in his eyes. Please don't do that. Don't make this harder than it already is. She's under pressure. I'm under pressure. Everyone's watching. If you refuse, it won't just embarrass us. It will destroy us. I studied him. My son. The boy I had raised, the man who once clung to my hand, crossing streets, now sitting before me torn between two worlds. His mother and his bride. You ask me to forget her words, I said slowly. To pretend I wasn't mocked in my own home. I ask you, he whispered, to see the bigger picture. To think of the family name. Father would have wanted unity, not division. The invocation of his father. A clever tactic, but one that cut both ways. His father had indeed wanted unity, but never at the cost of dignity. I leaned forward, meeting his eyes. Your father would never have tolerated such disrespect, and neither will I. He swallowed, his face paling. But, I continued, softening just enough to keep him on edge, I will consider it. On my terms, not hers, not yours. Hope flickered in his gaze, though uncertainty shadowed it. He rose, bowed his head, and left without another word. The moment the door shut, I exhaled. Another battle had begun. They wanted me at that wedding desperately, which meant one thing only. The power was mine. The next day, she returned, not on her knees this time, but standing tall, her chin lifted high, her eyes sharp with defiance. She had painted her face with fresh determination, her dress immaculate, her smile tight as a blade. I came to clear the air, she said, stepping into my house without waiting for an invitation. I closed the door slowly behind her. Is that so? She walked into the parlor, glancing at the portraits on the wall, my husband in his prime, my son as a child. Her gaze lingered on none of them. She turned back to me with cold resolve. Yesterday I begged, she said flatly. Today, I don't. If you attend the wedding, good. If you don't, she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. I'll make sure everyone knows how cruel you've been. I'll tell them you refused to bless your only son's marriage. I'll paint you as bitter, jealous, spiteful. And they will believe me. Her threat hung in the air like smoke. I studied her calmly. You think reputation frightens me? It should, she snapped. Because in this family, appearances are everything. People already whisper that you're difficult, stubborn, controlling. Do you really want to give them proof? So the mask had finally fallen. No more honeyed words, no more desperate pleas, just naked ambition sharpened into threat. I walked to the cabinet, opened a drawer, and pulled out a folder. Slowly, deliberately, I set it on the table between us. Her eyes flicked down, curiosity flashing into unease. These, I said softly, are your debts. Your creditors' letters? The overdue notices you tried to hide? Did you think I hadn't seen them? Did you think I wouldn't understand why you're so desperate for this marriage to look perfect? Her face blanched, the confidence draining in an instant. Where did you, she began, but I raised a hand. Doesn't matter. What matters is this. You need me more than I need you. And if you dare to smear my name, I'll show these to your sponsors, to the guests, to the world. Tell me, how quickly would your carefully crafted image collapse then? Silence thickened between us, her breathing sharp, shallow. Finally, she whispered, What do you want? I leaned back in my chair, my voice steady. Respect, nothing more, nothing less. If you want me at your wedding, you will treat me as family, not as furniture to be discarded. She stood frozen, her pride and fear warring on her face. At last, she nodded stiffly. When she left, the house seemed quieter, almost serene. The first battle had ended, but I knew it was only a skirmish. Because a woman who threatens so easily never surrenders for long. It didn't take long. Secrets never stay buried, especially when desperation leaks through every word, every glance. My son came to me late in the evening, his face stormy, his movements restless. "You knew," he said without preamble. "About her debts." I set aside my knitting and met his eyes. "Yes." His jaw clenched. "And you didn't tell me?" I lifted a brow. "Would you have listened? Or would you have accused me of jealousy, as she did?" He looked away, pacing across the room like a man cornered by his own mistakes. "She promised me everything was under control. She swore the wedding would be a new beginning. But creditors have been calling nonstop. The dress, the flowers, even the deposit on the venue, paid on credit. All of it. So the truth had clawed its way into daylight. "She needs me," he muttered, almost to himself. "Without me, she has nothing." "Correction," I said gently. "Without you, she has nothing. With you, she drains everything you have." His head snapped toward me, anger flaring in his eyes. "Don't speak about her like that." I didn't flinch. "Then don't let her make a fool of you." For a long moment, silence stretched between us. I saw the boy he once was, stubborn, loyal to a fault, desperate to believe in love even when it turned poisonous. My heart ached, but I couldn't soften the truth. "You're defending a woman who mocked me in my own house," I said quietly, "who paraded her cruelty in front of your family. And now you discover she's drowning in debt, dragging you down with her. Tell me, is this the future you want?" He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. For the first time, I saw shame break through his pride. "She said she'd fix it," he whispered, "that once the wedding was over, everything would be different." I leaned forward. "Listen to me. A marriage doesn't erase debts. It multiplies them. And if you tie yourself to her lies, you will carry them for the rest of your life." The clock ticked. The air was heavy with his turmoil. Finally, he lifted his head, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "I don't know what to do," he confessed. I reached across the table, laying my hand over his. "Then wait. Watch. The truth will reveal itself soon enough." When he left, shoulders hunched under invisible weight, I knew the alliance between them was cracking. She had mocked me. She had threatened me. But now, her own lies had turned against her. And the wedding, once their shared dream, was becoming their battlefield. The house became a hive of frenzied activity, invitations scattered across the dining table, fabric swatches draped over chairs, lists of vendors scribbled on scraps of paper. But beneath the polished surface of wedding preparations, there was chaos. The dressmaker called first, her voice sharp with irritation. "We can't proceed without another deposit. Your future daughter-in-law promised it weeks ago." An hour later, the florist rang. "We were assured the balance would be paid. If not by tomorrow, we cancel the order." By evening, the caterer left a curt message. No payment, no event. The walls closed in with every phone call. My son stormed through the hall with his tie loosened, his face pale, barking into his phone, trying to stall creditors. His bride trailed behind him, snapping, "Just fix it! You're supposed to handle this." Their voices echoed upstairs, spilling through the house like poison. The very event that was supposed to unite the family was tearing it apart before it began. And I? I moved silently through the chaos, unseen but listening. Every unpaid bill, every desperate argument was a stone added to the mountain pressing down on them. At dinner, the storm erupted. My son slammed a folder of invoices onto the table. "This is impossible! We can't afford half of this. You lied to me." Her eyes blazed. "Don't you dare blame me. This is supposed to be our day, not some cheap backyard barbecue. I won't be humiliated in front of your family and your father's business partners." He leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Then maybe there shouldn't be a wedding at all." The words hung in the air like a struck bell. Her face drained of color. For the first time, fear overtook her anger. She glanced at me then, as if realizing I had heard every word. I said nothing, only sipped my tea. Silence can cut deeper than shouting. Afterward, she cornered me in the kitchen, her voice trembling. You can't let him cancel. If this wedding doesn't happen, I'll be ruined. Her desperation bled through the cracks of her pride. You were ruined before you ever stepped into this house, I said softly. But you still have a choice. Respect the family you're marrying into, or lose it entirely. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes wet but blazing with resentment. She said nothing more, only turned sharply and stormed upstairs. The wedding was still on paper, but in reality it was collapsing piece by piece. And I knew the true collapse, public and final, was still to come. The next morning brought a visitor I hadn't expected. Mr. Harrington, my late husband's longtime business partner, arrived unannounced. A tall man, graying at the temples, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He had been at our table many times over the years, always loyal, always watchful. I welcomed him into the study, where my husband's portrait hung above the fireplace. He glanced at it, then at me, his jaw tight. I've heard disturbing things, he said without preamble. Vendors unpaid, contracts breached, and a wedding being planned as though this family were a bottomless well of money. I folded my hands calmly. Your information is accurate. His eyes narrowed. Your husband built his legacy with dignity. He wanted his family to carry that name with pride. Tell me, do you think a woman who mocks her elders, who sinks herself in debt, who treats this house like a stage for her vanity, do you think she honors that legacy? I said nothing, letting the silence answer. He leaned closer. I hold the controlling vote in the foundation your husband established. The funding for the wedding comes through me, and I will say this only once. If you, his widow, are not present, there will be no funding, not for the wedding, not for anything. So that was why she had begged at my door, why my son had bargained. It wasn't just appearances, it was survival. Without me, the money evaporated. What do you expect me to do? I asked softly. His gaze softened just a fraction. Stand firm. Your presence alone is enough, but if they continue to disrespect you, I'll cut the funding myself. Let them fall. Your husband didn't build an empire to see it squandered on arrogance. A strange warmth spread through me, part relief, part vindication. I wasn't alone. My husband had chosen his allies well, and they still stood watch. When Harrington left, I found her waiting in the hall. She must have overheard, for her face was pale, her bravado gone. You knew, she whispered. You knew all along he'd demand you be there. I looked her in the eye. Of course. My husband prepared for everything. He knew men like Harrington would protect his legacy. Her lips trembled, her hands clenched at her sides. If you ruin this for me... I stepped past her, my voice cold. No. You ruined it yourself the moment you mocked me. Now you're only living with the consequences. That night, the house vibrated with arguments between her and my son. Doors slammed, voices rose, promises broke. The alliance that had once seemed unshakable now teetered on the edge of collapse. And I, for the first time in weeks, slept soundly. By the end of the week, the house had become unbearable. My son moved like a shadow, worn down by arguments. She, on the other hand, grew sharper, her desperation flaring into recklessness. It was after dinner when the storm erupted. The table had barely been cleared when she slammed a stack of invoices down in front of my son. Do something, she cried, her voice shrill. You promised me a wedding worthy of your family name. And what do I get? Calls from creditors, threats from vendors, and a mother-in-law who refuses to cooperate. He rubbed his forehead, his voice low and tired. I told you, we don't have the money. Not like this. Her laughter was bitter. Don't have the money? You're sitting on a house worth millions, a name tied to a fortune. If she, her finger stabbed the air toward me, would just sign it over, all of this would be solved. The words froze the air. My son glanced at me, shame flickering across his face, but he said nothing. I rose slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. This house is not yours to demand, I said evenly. It is my home, built with my husband, paid for with our sacrifices. You may wear his son's ring, but you will never dictate his widow's place. Her face twisted. Then you're condemning your own son. Without this wedding, his career is finished, his reputation destroyed. You'll watch him sink because you're too selfish to let go. I stepped closer, my voice low and cutting. What ruins a man faster, a canceled wedding or a wife who drowns him in lies and debt? The silence was thunderous. My son's head bowed, his hands clenched tight. And then, with a cry half rage, half despair, she grabbed the vase from the mantel and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, shards scattering across the floor. "You will regret this," she screamed, eyes blazing. "If you won't give me what I deserve, I'll take it another way." She stormed out, her heels striking like gunshots against the floorboards. The front door slammed so hard the glass rattled in its frame. For a long moment, the house was still. My son sat frozen, his face ashen. "She'll come back," he whispered, though his voice held no conviction. I touched his shoulder gently. "Perhaps. But each time she leaves, she takes a piece of you with her. One day, you'll see there's nothing left." His eyes met mine, filled with torment. He wanted to defend her, but the cracks were widening too quickly. The breaking point had come. And the wedding, instead of binding this family, was tearing it apart thread by thread. The morning after the vase shattered, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. I was done waiting for their chaos to consume me. It was time to act. I called Harrington first. His voice was brisk, businesslike, but beneath it lay steel. "I suspected as much," he said when I told him of the tantrum. "She's unraveling. That makes her dangerous, but also predictable. We'll use that." By noon, he was in my study with a leather folder. Inside were contracts, funding agreements, trust allocations, stipulations my husband had prepared before his death. "Your presence at the wedding is not just symbolic," Harrington explained. "It's written into the funding clauses. Without you, nothing releases. Not 1 cent. That was your husband's safeguard." The irony almost made me laugh. The very woman who had mocked me for being too old was now chained to my presence, whether she liked it or not. I leaned back in my chair. "Then it's time we stop hiding the truth. If they want a wedding, it will be on my terms." That evening, I asked my son and his fiancée to join me in the parlor. She swept in with forced confidence, her eyes darting nervously toward the folder on the table. My son followed, pale and quiet. "I've spoken with Mr. Harrington," I began. "Here is the situation. The funding is conditional. Without me at the wedding, there is no money. Without my approval, no contracts will be honored. The decision is simple. You treat me with respect, or you have nothing." Her face flushed scarlet. "This is blackmail," she hissed. "No," I corrected calmly. "This is reality. My husband saw through greed long before it reached this house. He put safeguards in place. You may think you're clever, but he was cleverer." My son rubbed his temples, torn between us. "Mother, please." I raised a hand. "I am not your enemy. But if you force me to choose between dignity and humiliation, I will always choose dignity, even if it destroys this wedding." For a moment, silence reigned. Then she laughed, a brittle, ugly sound. "You think you've won? Fine. Sit at your little table, smile for your little photos, but don't forget, people talk, and I can ruin you in whispers." I leaned forward, my gaze steady. Try, and remember, I hold your debts in my hands. One word to your creditors, and you won't be whispering, you'll be begging. Her smile collapsed. She turned on her heel and stormed out, my son trailing helplessly after her. I sat alone, the firelight flickering against my husband's portrait. The counterstrike had been made. The rules were mine now. But I knew the war wasn't over. Not yet. The church bells tolled, their solemn chime at odds with the chaos that brewed beneath the polished surface of the day. The guests arrived in glittering waves, laughter spilling down the aisles, unaware that the marriage they had come to witness teetered on a knife's edge. I arrived deliberately late, escorted by Mr. Harrington. Gasps rippled through the pews as I stepped inside. For weeks, whispers had spread that I would not attend. Now, every eye turned toward me, and in that moment, I was no longer the widow to be dismissed. I was the matriarch, the axis on which the entire day spun. At the altar, my son's face brightened with relief. His bride's smile froze. The ceremony began, the words heavy with ritual, but beneath them ran a current of tension. The bride's hand trembled in my son's. Her eyes darted often toward me, as if I were a shadow haunting her vows. Then came the speeches at the reception. Glasses clinked, toasts flowed, and the air grew thick with pride and performance, until Harrington rose. "Today," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd, "we honor not only a marriage, but a legacy. A family bound by respect, not greed, by dignity, not arrogance." His gaze swept the hall, pausing deliberately on the bride. "Let it be known that this day could not exist without the blessing and presence of the matriarch who embodies that legacy." The applause that followed was thunderous. I inclined my head modestly, though my heart pounded. Across the table, her smile cracked, her glass trembling in her hand. She rose abruptly, her voice sharp, cutting through the cheers. "Respect? Is that what we're calling it? A woman who holds us hostage, who waves money over our heads like chains?" Gasps. Silence. All eyes turned. My son tugged at her sleeve, whispering urgently, but she shook him off. "You all think she's a saint. But without her, this day would be ours, not hers. She wanted the spotlight, and she stole it." The room chilled, whispers spread like wildfire. I stood slowly, steady as stone. "If I wanted the spotlight," I said clearly, "I would not have kept silent while you mocked me at my own table. If I wanted chains, I would not have allowed this wedding to proceed at all. I came because family matters, even when it wounds us. But respect, my dear, respect is earned, not demanded." For a heartbeat, the hall was frozen. Then Harrington's voice cut through. "And respect denied will always destroy itself." The bride's face blanched. My son stared at her, horror dawning in his eyes. The perfect day had cracked in full view of everyone. The wedding had not united them. It had revealed them. The morning after the wedding, the house was silent again, but not with peace. It was the silence of something broken beyond repair. My son sat alone in the parlor, still in his crumpled suit from the night before. His hands shook as he held a glass of untouched water, his eyes hollow. He looked up when I entered, and in his expression, I saw the wreckage of his choices. "She ruined it," he whispered. "She ruined everything." I did not answer at once. The echo of her outburst still lingered in my mind, the venom in her voice, the gasps of the guests, the whispers that had followed us all out of the reception hall. A bride who had turned her wedding into a battlefield. A wife who had exposed herself before the ink on her vows had dried. "She showed the truth," I said at last. "Ruined or not, the mask is gone." His hands clenched around the glass until it trembled. "People are already talking. Harrington told me he won't back the partnership anymore. He said he can't tie the family name to someone who disrespects it." There it was, the cost of arrogance, not just gossip, but power, money, influence slipping away. Upstairs, she raged. I could hear her footsteps pounding, the slam of drawers, the shriek of her voice carried faintly down the stairs. Even in defeat, she blamed me. Always me. "She'll blame you until the end," I told my son gently. "But you know the truth now. She isn't destroying me. She's destroying you." He covered his face with his hands. For a moment I pitied him, caught in the snare of a woman's ambition and his own blindness. But pity was not enough to save him. He would have to choose for himself. By noon, she stormed out of the house, suitcase in hand, her vows barely a day old. She shouted as she left, threats about lawyers, about dragging us all down. But her voice grew smaller as the car pulled away, until the street was quiet again. I stood at the window, watching the dust settle. My son remained seated, his shoulders sagging, his head bowed. The guests who had laughed at me weeks ago now whispered a different story. The matriarch who had been mocked had stood her ground, and the bride who mocked her had collapsed in public disgrace. And I was still here, still standing, still the keeper of the house, of the name, of the dignity they had tried to strip away. They had underestimated me. They always had. But now the world knew. Without me, nothing held. Weeks passed. The frenzy of the wedding, the spectacle of its collapse, faded into whispers that drifted through the town like smoke. Neighbors who once chuckled at my expense now spoke in hushed tones about that scene at the reception, and the bride who had lost her composure in front of everyone. My son lived in the house still, though he moved like a man haunted. His bride had left after only a handful of days, her debt snapping at her heels, her threats dissolving into empty air. She had thought the wedding would crown her. Instead, it unmasked her. For me, life settled into something quieter. I tended the garden, polished the frames of the family photographs, finished the crossword puzzles my husband had left behind. Each small act was a reclaiming. Every corner of the house whispered of what we had built together, not wealth, not grandeur, but dignity. One evening, Harrington came by. We shared tea in the study, where my husband's portrait watched over us. "You did well," he said simply. "You let them dig their own graves. That's harder than striking first." I smiled faintly. "It was never about revenge. It was about respect." He nodded, understanding. He had seen it too. How silence can cut deeper than any blade. How patience can unravel lies more surely than anger. Later, after he left, I sat alone with the dusk pressing against the windows. The memory of that family dinner returned, the laughter, the sting of her words. No elderly guests. They had thought me irrelevant, a relic to be hidden away. And yet, when the day came, I was the axis around which everything turned. Without me, the wedding had no meaning, no funding, no future. Without me, their carefully constructed illusions collapsed into dust. I traced the curve of my husband's signature on the last note he had left me. "Not everything is as it seems. Be ready." I had been ready. I had endured the humiliation, the threats, the storm. And in the end, I had not needed to raise my voice or strike them down. They had destroyed themselves, piece by piece, while I stood steady. The garden outside glowed with late sunlight, marigolds blooming in fierce bursts of orange and gold. I opened the window, breathing in the scent of earth and resilience. The world would keep whispering. Let it. They could whisper all they liked about the bride who fell apart, the son who faltered, the widow who endured. I knew the truth. I had not only survived, I had won.